Okay. So Mike is our sommelier, professional here who has taken the time out to share his passion and his expertise in the wine industry with us. And as we know, explorers love to have a good time, and a lot of those times include wines. And so why not learn a little bit more about it? Mike graduated in '99. He was a marketing major, and moved up to New York and got into the business right away after graduation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to him and let's get into the good stuff.
Now that you mentioned 99 and marketing major, it reminds me how I really got on the path. And I'll tell you, I grew up in a family of butchers in Philadelphia. I worked there all my life. I was the first one in my family to graduate or to go to college even. And I was really gung-ho about college and graduating and all that sort of stuff. And I was interning at Payne Weber while I was at LaSalle my senior year. And it was from a fraternity brother in Fiji that Joe knows, Barney Martin, because he had worked there and he passed it on to me. I was working there and I was like, okay, I want to move to New York City and I want to work in the financial world, whether it be for Payne Weber or whoever. So I got an interview in Jersey City for Morgan Stanley, for an entry-level job at Morgan Stanley. This was April of 1999. And I met with the guy and he was nice. He liked me. He's like, okay, here's a story. You're hired, but you have to start immediately. And I had already planned on going to Europe for a couple months after I graduated. And I told the guy that, and he was like, no, if you want the job, you have to come and work for us right away. So I went back to LaSalle, and that was like weighing on my head very heavily. And I didn't know what to do. And coming, as the first person graduating from college in my family, that was a real big deal. And I went to, Sharon Javi, who is the head of the marketing department. And I told her like, hey, Dr. Javi, I got this offer, but they told me I can't go to Europe and I have to start right away. And she was like, you have to take the job. You have to do it. And then I kind of slept on it for a week or two. And I said, you know what? I'm going to Europe. So I didn't take the job. I didn't listen to Dr. Javi. And I went to Europe. And, while I was there, I went to France and I went to Italy and I went to all these places and ate and drank. And I really got into wine. That was like the first part of me getting into wine, was going on that trip. And it was definitely the first big step. And looking back, it was the right move, and it just seems kind of funny that I was reminded of that from this conversation. But so I did go to Europe. I did move to New York. I was working in marketing when I first started in New York City. And I was always curious about wine. I always liked it. I remember going to cocktail parties in New York and just everyone people would bring beer, people would bring liquor, and other people would bring wine, and I would taste wine. And I kind of got into it. And that just kind of got me started on being interested in wine. So, within the first year of being in New York, I was studying wine by myself. I would go to stores, buy bottles of wine, buy books, read about it. And then eventually it took over everything. All of my thoughts were wine. And I was just really, really deep into it. So I was like, I'm going to work in wine. So I found a job working for a very specialized wine company that only specialized in the wines of Burgundy. And if you know much about wine, Burgundy is really the pinnacle in the world of wine. It's the most expensive wines in the world come from Burgundy. It's the wines that people go crazy for. It's the rarest wine to get. So Burgundy is very small, and they only produce a very small amount of wines. But the demand is so high throughout the world that it's not uncommon for bottles of wine, on release to cost 10 grand a bottle. So my formal education in wine started in the wines of Burgundy. And that was really starting at the top. And I got so drunk, pardon the pun, with passion for Burgundy that within a year of working for this place, I moved to Burgundy. So I lived in Burgundy for about 2 years. That was when I was, I guess, 24 years old, 24, 25, and 26. I was living there, and I got a job working for a winery. So I was making wine. I was working in the vineyards. I was just learning from top to bottom what wines of Burgundy was, and just was like a really amazing experience. You know, I helped replant vineyards. I helped pick the grapes. I did 2 harvests. I did a lot of stuff and really learned from, in essence, I was like a minimum wage migrant worker working in the vineyards for an entire 2-year span. And there were people there who I was working with who, you know, were, you know, for lack of a better word, gypsies from Eastern Europe that were working, and they couldn't get their mind around why someone who was American would take that job, because for them it was just for a paycheck. But for me, it was really for an education to just break my back doing that type of work. So I did all that. I moved back to New York, and I said, okay, now I want to learn the business side of wine. So I started working for LVMH, for Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy. I got a job as sort of a marketing person, you know, a job that was really what I went to school for, managing 5 of their brands for the United States, the European portfolio. So it was Veuve Clicquot Champagne, it was Krug Champagne, it was a Burgundy producer called Bouchard Père and Fils, and a Chablis producer called William Febvre. So I was the US marketing manager for those wines. So I did that. I did that for a couple years, and kind of ultimately decided that it got a little boring for me, and I wanted to get back to the real passion of wine side. So I just sort of did the calculations in my head and said, if I'm going to really learn more about wine and learn about the expensive wines of the world, the only job I can really have and not have to pay for the wines was to become a sommelier. So I figured I had enough background education in living in Burgundy and working in Burgundy and doing that sort of stuff, that I could just walk into a restaurant and they'd be very, you know, excited to have someone like me, even though I didn't really have any restaurant experience. So I just started from the top. So I went to Restaurant Danielle on the Upper East Side, and I literally knocked on the door and said, I want to be a sommelier. And they laughed in my face, even though I had all of that background education and I could speak French and I could do all that sort of stuff. They said, you have no experience working at a restaurant and you need more experience. So they didn't give me a job. So I went to another restaurant that was a Michelin-starred restaurant, very well known, called Boulay. It was in Tribeca, but they weren't as, I guess, they weren't as hierarchical as Boulud was. They just said, you seem good, you're hired. They pretty much hired me on the spot. So I worked for them for about 6 months just to get my feet wet. And then I went back to Danielle and I said, okay, I have experience. I worked at a Michelin, 2-star Michelin restaurant with fine wine service. And they said, okay, you're hired. So they gave me a restaurant to run. It was called DB Bistro. It was in the Theater District. I did that for a year. Then after that, they gave me this entire corner of West 64th Street, right across the street from Lincoln Center. It was called Bar Boulud and Boulud Sud. So I ran that whole corner in terms of wine for 10 years. And while I was there, I was fortunate just to get so much accolades and so much press, because I was doing different things. You know, I was doing things that other people weren't doing. I would buy wines at auction, and I would buy expensive wines at auction and open them up and pour them by the glass, like large format Magnums and Jeroboams. And I would do that at cost. And I didn't even tell Danielle or the people who were really checking the numbers that I was doing it. I just did it to bring people in. So I created this kind of movement of people drinking aged wines that they would never get anywhere else in the world by the glass at cost. So from that, it sort of exploded in the industry. And I got all these awards: Best Sommelier in America, Food and Wine Magazine Sommelier of the Year, interviews, TV shows. I did a show on Vice with my friend Eddie Wong, like just a lot of stuff. And it was so much fun. And you want to talk about living large. It was incredible, where I learned that there's all these rich guys in New York that want to hang out with you, and they want to invite you to their homes to drink expensive wine. and they want to fly you on their private planes to their homes in Aspen just to talk about wines. And it was this world of incredible experience. You know, like the guy that runs Goldman Sachs, this guy David Solomon, I flew on his private jet 5 times and went to his house in Aspen and drank like Romani Conti with that guy. And he wanted me to be with him, and he wanted me to talk to him about wine. And that's the kind of cool part when you get these sort of masters of the universe people who are so wealthy and are so you know, full of prestige in their industry. They'll listen to the wine expert, and I think it's kind of a very cool experience that I had to be able to sort of be the guy who everyone was listening to, kind of like E.F. Hutton. You know, everyone pays attention to him when you were talking about wine. So that was the real, like, the perks of the gig were that. And it was just so much fun and so excellent. And I mean, I drank all the greatest wines ever made. I never paid for them either. And that was really what I set out to do in becoming a sommelier. And then eventually I wanted to start a business. I knew that I didn't own the restaurant. I knew that you know, at one point I was an employee and I wanted to do something for myself. So a few years ago, I started a business, mainly consulting and also buying wines direct, buying wines at auction, and selling them to consumers. So that's what I'm doing today. And that's what allows me to sort of work from home, to be in Philadelphia. I could be in Spain, I could be anywhere and do this job. And I'm quite fortunate to be able to do it. I'm very excited to be able to do this type of thing. And I'm very happy to be here today with fellow LaSalle alumni. So if you have any questions about any of that stuff, please let me know. Otherwise, we can get into the wine tasting right now, if that makes sense for you all. Mary, what do you think? Okay, what do you think? Yeah?
I think it sounds great. Let's go.
Okay, so I didn't want to really put everyone out in buying expensive wines because, you know, that's the way to do things. And I'm not a snob when it comes to that. Like, I like drinking expensive wines, but I also like drinking wines that are great values, that represent where the wine comes from. Because for me, for a wine to be great, it doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to be, it has to have a sense of place, meaning that I want a Napa Valley wine to taste like Napa Valley. I want a Burgundy wine to taste like Burgundy. I want a Barolo to taste like a Barolo. And that seems somewhat, you know, yeah, duh, but it's not really that, because there's always a bit of BS in wine, sad to say. And the wineries, you know, they have to differentiate themselves. They have to sell their wines. So the easiest path, the path of least resistance, is creating a wine that everyone likes. And a wine that everyone likes generally is a boring wine, a fruity wine, a wine that just kind of is, you know, inoffensive. And those are not the kind of wines that I appreciate. I like wines to really show where they come from. And wines don't have to be, that's the great thing about wine. If you really are interested in wine, and for those characteristics, you do not have to spend a lot of money to get that, right? Because if you're informed, if you really care about wine and you really care about the place of wine is produced, you can drink for inexpensive for the rest of your life. And all you have to do is just a little bit of homework to say, okay, you know, the wines of California at best are supposed to taste like this. The wines of Campania on the Mediterranean coast of Italy are supposed to taste like this. And you can really find a lot of pleasure if you do get to do that. So the 3 wines that I chose today, I tried to keep it simple. I wanted to taste wines from California, and they're all around 20 bucks a piece, which is good. You know, that's pretty much the breaking point of where you can get good wine, I think. I mean, you sometimes get wine for around $15, but 20 bucks is really, you're getting stuff that can be quite good. And it's really, you should base it on a retailer. Like, the best place to get good wines is from a trusted retailer, and people telling you the right things, people that are passionate about wine. And I'm quite passionate about these. And what we're going to do is, I guess, get started. So the first wine that we have is a Chardonnay. It's called Calera. Okay, that's the wine that I put on the sheet that I wanted for us to taste together. Now, this is Chardonnay from California, right? And it comes from the central coast of California. So that's like Santa Barbara County, Santa Rita. It's the area that's south of, very far south of San Francisco, not far from the city of Santa Barbara, maybe within, 2 or 3 hours of Santa Barbara north. So it's between San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara. So this is an area that's characterized by the proximity of the Pacific Ocean, right? And the one thing you need to recognize when it comes to white wines and Pinot Noir to an extent is that cool climate is your friend, okay? Even though we're in California, we're on the coast, right? We're near the Pacific Ocean. So the Pacific Ocean is very, very cold. And that cool air that comes in really drops the temperature on a daily basis about 10 to 15 degrees. And that's all the difference you need to make great Chardonnay. You go say 30 miles outside of that area, you go east and you're in a dead zone of heat. And there's no way you can produce good Chardonnay in that area. But because we're close to the ocean, we're able to get the cool air and freshness that you really need for good white wine. Because white wine is great, but white wine always needs acidity, right? It's like you need that lemon freshness in white wine for it to be enjoyable, in my opinion. White wines that are like 15% alcohol that don't have acidity are really bad, in my opinion. You always need sort of a zip of acidity, sort of like a squeeze of lemon in a white wine in order to be enjoyable. And that cool air from the Central Coast allows us to get that zip of freshness. So let's try it. Okay, so this is 100% Chardonnay, grown on the Central Coast. It sees a little bit of oak, and it's like naked. And that's what you want to sort of have to really assess the quality of the wine. When you use too much oak, it covers the quality of the wine oftentimes. And it doesn't allow you to really get to the heart of it, is this wine good or not? Right? So it's not, oak is not a prominent aroma when you smell this. You smell more of like a citrusy and appley aroma. Somewhat like a fennel almost, sort of a sweet vegetal quality. It's juicy, but it's not too rich, right? And the acid is superb, in my opinion. You feel that like your mouth watering right here. That's what you want, or at least that's what I want, and that's what fine wine. I think that kind of steps this wine up to like close to a fine wine level because it has that complexity. It has a richness to it, but also your mouth is watering, so you have a balance of fruit and freshness. And that's the sort of ingredient that says, okay, this is good. Okay, I want to drink another glass. Because when a wine lacks that acidity, you oftentimes don't want to drink it. It's just so heavy that it almost like gives you like a stomach ache. Where the acidity balances the wine and you say, okay, let's have another. Let's have another. And that just goes back to the site, right? The vineyard area. And that is most important with wine. When you have a natural effect of the ocean air coming in and cooling the wine, that's incredible. That's what makes great wine. The winemaker is important, but it's really that area, that they call it terroir, that makes it great. So the idea is, where are the great terroirs of the world? There's definitely some in California. Burgundy is a great terroir. Bordeaux is a great terroir. Champagne's a great terroir. Italy, the entire country is great, in my opinion. And I would say that the one key thing that you find that makes a great wine region is, the cooling factor from the ocean air is definitely one thing. But I'd say also topography, hillsides, elevation, especially when it comes to warm areas. And, like when you go back to ancient Greece and the Greeks and the Romans, and when the Greeks first came to continental Europe from Greece, they first went to what is now Marseille, and they planted grapes all along the river. So that was like the Rhone River. They planted grapes all the way up. So they knew that the grapes needed cool air, so they kept it close to a body of water, but they also planted them high up and not on the more fertile flatlands below. And that it's really amazing. They did that out of necessity, because where they planted vegetables and things, they put it on the flatland because it was easier to cultivate. And on the higher slopes where there wasn't topsoil, where it was more sort of outcroppings of rocks, the only thing that could survive in that type of poor soil were grapevines. So that's where they planted the grapevines. And the irony of that is that the greatest wines come from the place that was considered the worst to grow things, right? And that's the beauty, that's the magic of wine. Like, you could really relate it to humanity in that you want someone that's struggled to survive, because it builds their character. And that's the same thing you could say about wine cultivation. The vines that struggle, that have to work, that don't have fertile soil everywhere, where the vines have to dig and dig and dig and dig and dig and dig and dig, the roots of the vines have to dig to find the water table, are always the most interesting grapes, because the vines need to work. What does a grapevine want to do? It wants to reproduce. How does it reproduce? It reproduces by growing grapes. And the idea is, like, the birds eat the grapes, and then the birds, leave the seeds after they eat them, and that plants more grapes. So that's like the force of life of a vine. And the more stress that the vines have, they can't produce as many grapes. So they'll like cut the production in half, a vine on a hillside versus a vine on the flatland. So the vine on the hillside will produce half as many grapes, but what they produce is smaller and more concentrated, and thus creates more interesting, more concentrated wine. So that's the wrap in a nutshell. And if you sort of stick to that sort of information, you'll find good wine for not a very expensive price. You just got to know these from hillsides, these are from flatlands. Okay, any questions on the Chardonnay? Did everyone like it? Did anyone not like it? It's okay if you don't, but I'd love to know why you didn't like it. I'll play devil's advocate. Maybe some people don't like it because it's sort of intense with the acidity. It's maybe not as sort of soft as a typical California Chardonnay that they have, and that's probably true. But for me, it adds character and complexity. Okay.
I'll say this much. I never thought that I would like a Chardonnay, because many of the Chardonnays I have had in time they tasted like thicker in my mouth, which I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, sure.
like I always lean toward a Sauvignon Blanc or a Pinot Grigio or something for that reason. But I love everything that you have to say, and it's definitely made me think again about there's so much more that goes into it, and the more you know goes a long way.
Yeah, but that's really kind of like Chardonnay, like that Chardonnay that you mentioned is a bastardization of Chardonnay. The original sort of idea of Chardonnay is, Chardonnay was born in Burgundy. That's the ancestral home of Chardonnay. And the white Burgundies are so good and so delicious, and have been for so long that, Americans, I'd say, I don't know, in the 1800s, 1900s, they went to Burgundy, they cut clippings off Chardonnay vines and they planted them in California and they propagated it and created a business out of it. And they just said, okay, let's take the path of least resistance to make money. So let's make this wine rich, fleshy, that everyone can sort of appreciate and understand. But over time, you realize those wines suck pretty much, and you want more complexity and balance to it.
And
So,
Mike, with California wines, when you think of Chardonnays, a lot of times you look at like Kendall Jackson, and it's
right.
the one that's marketed real heavy,
Big
real
time.
apple forward. This is a lot more lemon, and I don't think I ever put the two together, but that really does hit that point where it's not syrupy, and I think that's what Mary was saying. It's like that syrupy, sugary feel. This really just cuts it. It's like, you know, eating something with it and have it clear your palate and just kind of move forward.
Have another glass, and that's the way it's supposed to be. That's what I'm saying. It's Chardonnay has been ruined for the American market because of Kendall Jackson and a lot of other producers who are just like not doing a good job and just trying to create mass market wines. And that's why you're saying, oh, I only like Sauvignon Blanc. That's really sad, because if you sort of knew that that's the bastardization of Chardonnay, you would say, okay, let me find good Chardonnay. And you can find incredible Chardonnay that's more like this in Burgundy for half that price, for like 12 bucks, 15 bucks, that are honest and delicious. But that's sort of the information that is not widely available, unfortunately. And just real quick about this guy that started Calera. He was a guy that loved Burgundy. This was in the 70s. He was a rich dude, and he loved Burgundy, and he literally said, okay, in order to make good Burgundy, what I've learned is that it has to have limestone soils, right? Because all Burgundy, it's all limestone. So he got a helicopter and flew over the certain parts of the coast of California to find outcroppings of limestone. And he found it, and he planted his vineyards, and he makes incredible wines. And a couple years ago, he sold his entire company to Duckhorn, that makes Merlot. So he achieved, I'd say he achieved greatness with his wines. And his Chardonnays are good. His Pinots are really, really good. Okay, should we move on to the next wine?
So Mike, just to say, this must be an important event because Brother Jerry Fitzgerald is
I know, I see.
gracing us with his presence. Look at that. When it comes to alcohol, he wasn't going to miss this one. So
thank goodness. Brother Jerry, you're on mute. You're on mute, Brother Jerry. You got to be on
My
mute.
husband thought it was the bobblehead, but it is actually the Brother Jerry.
I guess we got to get him unmuted. Anyway.
I am not techie, but because Michael Madrigale is supporting us and back in the hood. I love it.
Yeah.
Good to see you all too. And I want to find where Joe Markman's getting that wine. This is great, Mike. I'm enjoying it. But
great to see you, brother. We got to do that dinner.
Absolutely.
Let's get it together. Okay.
Hello, Jerry. I think I got an Albert's 110.
There you go.
Okay, so let's move on to the next wine, which is this Pinot Noir, Avarin. So, like Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, the ancestral home is Burgundy, France, right? So, the wines of Burgundy have been, it's really the pinnacle of wine, in my opinion. And you just have so many people that are so passionate about Burgundy that they want to replicate, or at least attempt to replicate, the style of wine here in the United States. And it's great. So the first step for them to try to do that was to find a suitable vineyard site to do that. So the wine Oregon Pinot Noir in Oregon started in 1969. That was when the first Pinot Noir grapes were planted there. And they were planted there by a guy named Dick Lett, L-E-T-T. And they call him Papa Pinot. He was the guy that said, okay, this area of Oregon sort of, it was on the same, I think, parallel as Burgundy, and they got the same amount of rainfall. And he did a study, and he said, okay, of all these factors that Burgundy has, the closest place in the United States that replicates it is this Willamette Valley in Oregon. And it was one guy who pretty much started a revolution of Pinot Noir in the state of Oregon. And I'd say, if push came to shove, I'd say the best Pinot Noir in the United States is from Oregon. I mean, there's definitely some great parts in California. Central Coast is one, and Sonoma is also one too. But I mean, for price point and for quality, I'd say Oregon really has it. Hold on one second. Let me turn on my light here. Yeah, so I would definitely say that. So we have this wine here. And when you think of Pinot Noir, can anybody give me some descriptions what they think Pinot Noir is, in their opinion? Like what are some characteristics of Pinot Noir, or that you think of when you think of Pinot Noir?
I like the deep berry, plum, dark cherry. I like those hints on the Pinot Noirs.
Yeah, I would say that. Pinot Noir is always berries. It's red berries, it's cherries, it's blackberries, okay? It's a berry fruit flavor. And also with Pinot Noir, it's not a full-bodied wine. It's more of an elegant wine, right? It's not tannic. It's the opposite of tannic. It's, elegant. And the reason is Pinot Noir is not a full-bodied tannic wine. It really comes to the skins of the grapes. The skin of Pinot Noir is very, very thin, right? So thin that there's always an issue of rot when it comes to Pinot Noir. Because when you grow the grapes in places that are cool, because Pinot Noir needs to be cool, it does not do well in hot regions. It needs sort of a moderate climate. And when that happens, it oftentimes it has a tendency to rot towards the harvest time, because the skins, once they sort of get a little bit too much sun or it gets a little bit too wet, mold starts growing. So that's why everyone always says Pinot Noir is very hard to grow, and it is, because it's very, very delicate. But on the flip side of that, the aromas, the flavors, the nuances, no other red wine can compete with Pinot Noir. It's a real sort of, it's like a musical wine that you really need to pay attention to get all the notes coming from it. It's not one-dimensional. It's like four-dimensional when it's at its best. And what's cool is this wine really has great characteristics of great Pinot Noir for $20, whatever this wine was. So let's get started here. Color is huge when it comes to Pinot, right? Pinot always has that kind of ruby red color. If you buy a Pinot Noir and you can't see through it, you bought a bad Pinot Noir, because it should always be translucent, right? It should not be dark. It should be ruby red, purplish. And that's really an extension of the skins, of their thin skins. Because if a thin-skinned grape has a dark color, that means they've concentrated that wine. Because wine is like making tea, right? The color of the wine comes from the skins, and the color is extracted by the punch down, they call it. So the skins, when they crush the grapes, they leave the skins in the vat, and daily they call it punch down. They'll push the skins down back into the juice so it extracts color. So if you find a Pinot Noir that's dark, that means they really push the skins down. It's almost like leaving a tea bag in a glass of hot water for a long time, where it's just too much. So the key is having that balanced, translucent color. And we have that here. And what we also have here is amazing aromatics, in my opinion. I mean, really, really pungent and very, very, very aromatic. Kind of spicy, but like real juicy, raspberry-ish. And you know, it's almost like a lot of times people describe aromas of Pinot as briar, which I love. You know, so like imagine a raspberry bush, a blackberry bush, where you're not only smelling the fruit, but you're smelling the leaves and the sticks that are in the bush. And that's really a typical aroma of Pinot Noir, briar. That is just a great, great way to describe the way it smells. I think it's delicious. I think it's juicy. I think it's really easy to drink. And it goes in soft, but then it kind of has this sort of dryish tannin or grip, a softer version of tannin, like an earthy grip that tells you that this is a little bit more serious than maybe the nose makes you think. Okay, so that sort of finish of the wine where it gets kind of dry and it tastes kind of earthy, that's what great Pinot Noir has. It has the fruit, but it also has, you know, it has the treble of the fruit and it has the base of the earthiness. And those together really create something nice. And that sort of chewy thing, or that grip that you get on the finish, allows you to say, okay, I can really have some food with this, right? It's not too delicate to have with food. So you could easily do salmon, but you could even step up and say, maybe I have some pork, maybe I have some game, you know, or something like that. Steak is too strong, but like you can really step up from the white fish or salmon. You could do sort of into further meats, you know, red meats rather, that because you have that sort of grip, earthiness on the wine. Yeah, I like it. I think for the price, it's awesome. It's an awesome wine. What do you think? Agree, disagree? Good, right? Price, man. I'm all about that. I don't want to spend a lot of money on wine, because I hate paying for expensive wine and not getting what I want. So, you know, like I find it rare that I buy wines like that I buy Burgundy. I don't buy it that much because there's a tendency to really not get what you pay for, because the wine is very, you know, the wines are kind of volatile and sometimes they're expressive and then sometimes they're not. So I'm always looking for value. And when I can't find it in, you know, Burgundy on the shelf, I'll look for Burgundy at auction, you know, and I work a lot with auction houses, and the wine auction market it's happening. Let me tell you, you know, the big auction houses, Sotheby's, Christie's, you know, Acker Merrill, like there's wine auctions every month. And I buy a ton of wine at auction because you can buy you can be like a bottom feeder, which is what I am. And I'll look for wines that people don't want to buy, but I always do my research and I know like this is going to be good. Nobody's bidding on it. I'm going to buy that wine. So then you can buy wines that are, that taste a lot more expensive than what the market rate was. So I find I do that a lot. I do that for you know, part of my consulting business. I do that for certain people. I buy wines for them, and they'll say, you know, I have 50 grand and I want to start my wine cellar. I'll say, okay, let's buy at auction. This is what I'm going to buy, and do that sort of thing. So believe it or not, there is a market for that, for people who want personal sort of wine collecting stuff. Okay. Shall we move on? Yep. Okay. So our final red wine is also from California, and it's Cabernet Sauvignon. You know, I stuck to the basics: Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon. That's really the best stuff coming out of California and the United States. So I wanted to find good representatives of those grapes from good growers that weren't very expensive. So that said, we're not tasting a Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley, right? Because Napa is that's like the expensive neighborhood of wines. You know, that's like the Fifth Avenue of wine production. So you're going to pay for the zip code. You know, there's other wines throughout the state of California that there's other areas that throughout the state of California that produce great Pinot Noir, right? But they're lesser known. And I mean, Cabernet Sauvignon, but they're lesser known. And one of those areas is Paso Robles, okay? Paso Robles is also in the Central Coast, right? And it's actually not far from where that Chardonnay was produced. But the difference is it's further inland, right? It doesn't get the cool air from the Pacific. It's about maybe 15 miles inland from where that Chardonnay came from. And that's what's so cool about California, that just 15 miles away, it's 30 degrees hotter, you know, and you can't grow Pinot there and you can't grow Chardonnay there, but you can grow Cabernet Sauvignon. And Cabernet Sauvignon is a grape that needs sun. It needs a lot of sun to ripen, to get properly ripened. So where does it grow in other parts of the world? It's Bordeaux, right? Cabernet Sauvignon is the primary grape of Bordeaux. Bordeaux is one of the classic wine regions of the world. And Cabernet Sauvignon in Bordeaux is planted on pretty much the edge of northwest France, okay? So you're literally on the Atlantic Ocean. You're, 10 miles inland from the Atlantic Ocean. But the Atlantic Ocean isn't as cool as the Pacific is. So having that sort of proximity to the sea allows it to be a little bit warmer, because the stones that are from that part are very big gallet stones, they're called. They're the goose egg stones, right? So that sun, that's where all the Cabernet Sauvignon is planted, is on that type of stone in Bordeaux. That sun hits those stones. Those stones retain that heat. So at night, when the temperature cools down, the stones radiate the heat, and the stones keep the ripening process going for the Cabernet Sauvignon vines in that area. And that's another like cool magic thing about the terroir of wines. If it wasn't for those stones, the Cabernet Sauvignon wouldn't ripen properly. But because the stones are there, they've learned that this is the optimum place in the world to grow Cabernet Sauvignon, right? Okay. So again, this is from Paso Robles. It's not Napa Valley. It's a little bit further south. It's warmer than Napa for the most part, but you're getting a lot of bang for your buck for this type of wine, okay? And this is cool. So as I mentioned, Pinot Noir is very berryish in its flavor. Bordeaux is not. Bordeaux is more plum. Bordeaux is not fruity, in my opinion. It's more of a savory, it's more of a meaty style of wine. You smell it right away. It has this sort of earthy, almost like, something that isn't fruit. People say minerality. That's sort of a word that gets overused in the world of wine. But I take minerality as anything that isn't a fruit aroma or a fruit flavor. So you can kind of say it's like an earthy flavor and aroma. And you get that here. It's not quite fruit. It's almost like asphalty. It smells like fresh asphalt that got laid on a street. And I find that a lot with certain grapes. Okay, like this is a perfect yin and yang between Pinot and Cab, right? This is tannic. The finish is dry and it's long, and it kind of like dries the sides of your mouth, okay? And what does that come from? It comes from the skins of the grape. Cabernet Sauvignon has very, very thick skins. Twice as thick as what you'll find in Pinot Noir. So those thick skins, when you do the part of press or you punching down, it extracts more dryness, more dry extract. And that sort of dry extract goes into the wine and creates a sensation like a full-bodied, firm, dry sensation. So that is very typical of Cabernet Sauvignon. And when you have that sort of impression, of tasting the wine, you go, okay, what kind of food could I have with this? This is when you go to steak. This is when you go to full-bodied, sort of heavy meats to stand up to that dryness. And that's the idea, right? You want to balance the dryness of the wine with some sort of food that can hold up to it. Because the worst thing is to have a wine too powerful for the food or a food too powerful for the wine. The idea is to have them meet and complement each other. And
So can I ask a quick question?
yeah, sure.
So when you're out to dinner and you're buying a bottle of wine, you match it with your entree, or how does that work?
Well, I mean, I will say
Tricky,
this.
right?
I usually buy the wine first, and then I decide what I want to eat.
Okay.
I kind of do it the opposite way. But what I'll do is say I have say there's like 4 people and everybody has a different dish. I will always buy champagne, believe it or not, because champagne is
My
something.
favorite.
Yeah, and it pairs with all. Champagne is the best food pairing wine in the world, and there's so much good champagne out there, and it's a wine that people don't really buy. You know, you get such high quality for what you pay for with champagne because the market doesn't really
Demand it.
buy it. Yeah, like Veuve Clicquot stinks. It's not good. You know, that's a mass market champagne. And there's so many small growers that are producing champagne that you can get such good stuff for like under $50.
Gloria Ferrer pink champagne.
That's
Yes.
not good either, to be honest. I'm sorry.
Mike,
You want to score with the bridesmaids? It is.
I'm gonna need some champagne recommendations then at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, you know, it's all like the movement of the small grower. Because traditionally, up until say 10, 15 years ago, all the small growers were so poor that they couldn't afford equipment to press and bottle their own wine. So what they would do is they would sell their grapes to the big houses. They would sell it to Veuve Clicquot. They would sell it to Moet. They would sell it to Roederer. They would sell it to Pierre Jouet, right? And then eventually they woke up and said, we got to do this ourselves. Let's buy our own equipment. Let's produce our own wine. We can control, you know, the quality, and instead of these big growers like giving us pennies of what we think our grapes are worth. So that movement happened over the past 20, 10, 15 years ago. So now you get all these growers that are producing great champagne, but the wine barring public at large, at least in the United States, don't recognize the brands. So they're forced to sell at a price that is really doesn't denote the quality, right? So you can really find incredible wines. One is a great one, and you usually find it at a lot of places. It's called Pierre Peters. Real easy to remember. And those are like small grower, like delicious champagnes. And you can find them all over. You know, even in Pennsylvania, you can find them.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So that's the idea. You know, I think a little bit of knowledge is good. You know, the world of wine regions, there's just so much out there. And it can be really daunting to sort of try to figure out what's good and what's not. But if you are informed, if you're an informed consumer, you can drink very well and not spending a lot of money. And have you guys ever heard of that place, Moore Brothers in Pennsauken?
I have an online account with them.
Yeah, that place is really, really good.
Is that too much information?
What's that?
I said, is that too much information? I see Ellen laughing at me. But listen, I love
No.
it because
No,
you
that place
keep
is good.
track and you rate your wines when you buy them, and you rate what you like about them. And, you know, they keep the store at like 50 to 54 degrees or something. They give you a coat when you walk in.
Yeah. I mean, for anyone who lives in Philly or the area of Pennsylvania, and, you know, you're very limited on what the state brings in, unfortunately. And even though they've tried, you know, to step it up, they're still not doing a great job, I have to say. So if you go to Moore Brothers in New Jersey or other places in Delaware or New York, you really can find so much better wine and less expensive and just like more interesting things than what we get.
Hey, Mike, what do you know about Maryland wine? Maryland ability to get wine?
Well,
different down
I'll
here.
tell you, I think Washington, D.C., that it's great to get wine there. D.C. and California, there's like no laws. So you
Right.
can, if like, you know, my business, we have a license in D.C. So you can be the importer, you can be the distributor, and you can be the retailer. You can like take every slice of the salami, where, you know, here in other places, they call them tied house laws,
Right.
where you can't, if you do one thing, you can't do the other. In California and DC, you can do whatever you want. So that's where you can get a lot of good stuff. And you can get it for the best price, I think, in the country from DC or California, because they can sort of, they can have every single margin involved.
So how do the auctions work? Like, how do you find them and
Well, they're out there. You know, they're, you know, like I said,
do a search?
Sotheby's, Christie's,
Okay.
Heritage. I mean, there's a lot. If a place, you know, the auction houses are like, okay, we have art, we have jewelry, we have books, and we have wine. Like most of them have wine, because it's all these, like, you know, the collector is, it's sort of like, it's like a mentality. So people who collect, they collect everything. So, you know, you have these guys who collect art and collect books, and then they die. And then the widow is like, what am I going to do with this? Okay, so you have one auction house, and they give them every single thing that they've collected. So if these auction houses have to have wine, because most of the time these guys, I've also collected wine. So it's sort of the collector mentality that these auction houses always have a wine department.
And they're only selling wine or auctioning wine that is considered to be still drinkable.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, I mean, like the places I mentioned are 100% respectable places,
Okay.
respectable establishments. And the people in charge, like, they'll see a bottle, and if the color's wrong, they'll reject it. They'll say,
Okay.
"I'm not selling this."
Because
Yeah,
if you unsettle somebody's wine cellar, I mean, that can change things pretty dramatically.
What do you mean?
Well, if you grab, like, you know, 150 bottles out of somebody's cellar that's been sitting there for 30 years, I mean,
Of course, but these guys are experts. You know what I'm saying? Like, they'll go in there, they'll be very gentle, they'll pack the stuff up, they'll transport it via refrigerated containers, they'll send it out. You know what I'm saying? Like, that stuff, if you know, if they're old and the cork falls in, you don't sell it. You just can't do anything about it. You know, that happens. You know, the test of time really wears on wines if they're not stored well. And if they'll, like, believe me, like, I bought collections from people, and I've gone to, like, I remember I went to this dude's house in Sleepy Hollow in Westchester, New York, and he had an amazing cellar, like, incredible. And he had stuff, I'd say it would be worth $1 million. And the guy was so dumb that he didn't put air conditioning in his wine cellar. So all the wine, it was shot. It was worthless. And I felt so bad. I was like, I can't buy any of this stuff. It's shot. And even so, I was, you know, it's that LaSalle sort of schooling that told me I can't, even if the bottles look good, my conscience wouldn't let me buy it and sell it. Because I was raised in LaSalle tradition and said, okay, I'm not going to go there. Because you could get away with selling it, because some of the bottles look good, but internally they were cooked. So I just walked away from it, and I told the guy, like, listen, I'm not going to take this, but I know someone who will. Here's his card. And the guy, and I found it because I was very curious. I reached back to the guy. I'm like, did that guy come and did he buy it? He's like, oh yeah, he bought everything. And I asked him, how much did you pay? And because I told you this wine could have been worth $1 million. He bought it for like 15 grand. And then I go to his website, and I see all the wines on there that was from that cellar. I won't tell you the name of the guy, but I saw all the wines on there. And then I told everybody I knew, like, don't ever buy wine from him.
Yeah.
He is, like, duplicitous and selling bad stuff, knowingly selling bad stuff.
So you talked about research early on in your presentation to us. Where do you begin? What are some of the sites and things? I mean, was it your palate that led you to begin your research, or?
No, you know, what's great. Where do you live, by the way?
Maryland.
Maryland. Okay.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of good wine shops in Annapolis and, in DC, and they always have like free wine tastings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that could be the first step for you to like go into these shops and, start tasting the wines for free where you don't have to pay for them. And you can kind of get started on seeing what you like and what you don't like. And if there aren't wine tastings, you should sort of find a respectable place that, whether through like seeing that they've got awards from Zagat's or something, that this is a good wine shop, and go in there and say, hey, I'm into discovering everything. I want to spend no more than $25 a bottle, and I want a case of wines, and give me something that I want wines that you like, that you think is great.
That's what I do at Moore Brothers. I say,
That's what you do,
go
man.
in,
Because
I would like a case of red, and I don't want to pay more than $16 a bottle.
Yeah, set the parameters and talk to the guy. And, anybody, if the wine shop is good, they hire passionate people. And passionate people want to turn you on to stuff. And because it's part of like their DNA. They want other people to see what they think is really great. And you give them that little bit of trust, and they'll really deliver for you. And that is pretty much my experience with any time I've given someone the reins to that type of thing. So that's what I would do. I would find a good wine shop and say, hey, this is my limit. This is what I want to buy. I want 12 bottles, blah, 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 and go from there.
So Mike, I have two questions for you.
Yeah.
First, can you give some advice about pairing wine and food? And the second one, because we've all encountered this where last minute we decide to go out to a restaurant. Oh crap, it's BYOB and we need to go grab a bottle of wine. What would be like your go-to wines when you're running into that Italian BYOB at the minute? So two questions there.
That's a hard question to answer because you're really beholden to the place that you're buying the wine from. And not all wine shops are created equal, right? And if you're stuck with going to, the Pennsylvania State Store on Washington Avenue, you're kind of stuck, and there's not a lot of good stuff there. So I would say if I was in one of those places, I would buy Côte de Rhône. And Côte de Rhône is it's cheap, and it comes from a place in France that's hot, that the wines will always be like enjoyable, and they won't be that expensive. Like I always said, like Côte de Rhône is like the pizza of wine, where even, there was that saying, even if it's bad, it's still pretty good. It's the same thing. Like even if it's bad, it's still not that bad because it's fruity, right? It may not be that full of character or interesting, but it is kind of fruity. So yeah, stick to Côte de Rhône, Rhône Valley in France. And then what was the other question? The first one?
About like good pairings, wine and various foods.
Sure. What are great wine pairings? The best wine pairing in the world for me is in the summertime when you're eating oysters. Oysters and a white wine from France called Muscadet. I don't know if anybody's ever had that. That is the greatest wine pairing.
Muscadet, Sauvignon.
Exactly. Muscadet, Sèvres and Maine. And those are the names of the rivers that are there. And Muscadet is not far from Brittany in France, near Mont Saint-Michel, that really incredible church. It's like an island. It's not far from there, and it's not far from the Atlantic Ocean. So you have Bordeaux, and right above it is that area in Muscadet. It's in the Loire Valley. And that stuff, it literally tastes like salt. It's like a salty white wine and has a minerality. It's a white wine that tastes like oysters. It tastes like oysters. So when you pair that with oysters, it's like, there's like a ripple effect when you have it, and it's really dry. And the best part about Muscadet, it's cheap as hell. And it's usually you shouldn't spend more than $20 for Muscadet. And it's also very different from Chardonnay, where it never sees oak. It's always in stainless steel, so it's very straightforward. So imagine Muscadet is the knife, and the oyster is the meat. So the knife just slices through the meat. And that's like just an incredible pairing. That's my favorite pairing of any food and wine. The simplicity of an oyster and white wine is incredible.
Michael, if you don't mind, could we expand on that question? If we
Yeah.
could go real quick, steak, chicken, pork, seafood. What are the 4 wines that
Sure.
you would pair with each?
Yeah, so steak is Cabernet Sauvignon, right? You know, again, like I mentioned, you need something with tannins. So I would say if you want to do steak, you do California Cab, you do Bordeaux, and if you want to venture out, you could do, say, even Barolo from Italy in the Piedmont. Okay, chicken. Chicken is pretty simple too. Chicken is one of those things where you can do white or red. So chicken is Rhone Valley. You could do Châteauneuf-du-Pape. You could do Côte Rôtie, which is from the Northern Rhone. You could do red Burgundy. You could do Pinot Noir. You want something sort of medium bodied when you do chicken. So any of those sort of red wines. If you want to do white, you could do very rich white Burgundy with chicken is a great pairing too. And a richer California Chardonnay. Like the one we had probably doesn't have enough stuffing to hold up to chicken, but sort of like a more expensive, say like a $50, $60 California Chard with barrel aging would probably be good with chicken. And then seafood, well, I mean, what seafood are we talking? Are we talking raw seafood, which is what I love, like when you have like crudo or even sushi or oysters, for example. Number one with a bullet is champagne. Champagne works with all that stuff. And champagne works with everything, even the steak I mentioned. That's like the trump card when it comes to food and wine pairing. A good bottle of champagne will pair with everything. But if you wanted to do raw seafood, champagne is great. Chablis is incredible from France. That stuff is awesome with seafood, raw specifically. And if you want to do like salmon or tuna, Pinot Noir actually works really well, as well as sort of a richer Chardonnay or a richer white Burgundy.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
So
What
guys,
else?
we're kind of up against it here at the time. I'll say maybe 1 or 2 more questions if anybody has one, and if not, I will move into the thank you.
Mary Kay, I want to thank you for organizing this. I'm probably the oldest guy in the group. I was back in LaSalle. Every time I see a young lady walking on, I live down near the Jersey Shore. And Michael's laughing already. So when I see a young lady walking with a LaSalle t-shirt on, I was the last class to vote no to no girls on campus.
Oh, wow.
They actually let us vote 2 years in a row. They let all the men on campus vote. We didn't want girls because we have to start using mouthwash and brush our teeth and everything.
Right.
And, you know, the nursing school for dates and stuff. So, you know, but I married a girl from Trenton State who fell in love with wine. I did a lot of shots and beer when I was in college. Wine is my whole thing. I'm just curious. I just think you ought to do this more often with more of our alumni, because I'm curious about how many people have cellars. How many people actually have a collection? During this pandemic, I've been drinking my own. I got into wine, fortunately, 40 years ago. Michael, you'd love it. I'm drinking a Godella tonight because I had pork. My wife made pork chops. So it's a Spanish Godella from northwestern Spain. But I've been drinking Bordeaux, 20, 30-year-old Bordeaux and Italian wines and stuff that I bought years ago because I can't go out anywhere now. And I'm interested in how many people have cellars or how many people would like to get together. I'm doing a thing Sunday in my yard down in Buena Vista Township in Atlantic County, New Jersey, of all the wines in Piedmont.
Cool.
You know, and tables set up in a whole big yard and stuff. So I'm always looking for people that just want to drink somebody's cellar because I'm tired of drinking them by myself. But Mary Kay, I wanted to thank you for making this arrangement and for Michael for providing so much information.
Sure.
You're so welcome, John. Send me an email. We will talk offline and we'll figure this out.
Okay.
Hey, John, I'm in Baltimore, but I would be happy to do something like this with you because that would be great.
I get down to Havre de Grace. There's a little place in Havre de Grace that I get down to all the time. They're called
So I wanted to ask, what
It's
is your
40 minutes
favorite
north.
Christian Brother wine, Michael?
Well, I have to say, I've only had Christian Brothers wines, I think, once in my life, and it was in Brother Jerry's dormitory.
I was about to
When he
say,
was
ask
helping
brother,
me,
Look, there
when
it
he was
is.
helping me with my accounting homework. And I've
Jerry
never
and
tasted
Brother
it again
Eddie.
because that was the perfect moment and ceremony to enjoy Christian Brothers.
Ask
You know,
Brother Eddie and Brother Jerry if their feet are still purple.
Yeah, Christian
I
Brothers.
thought that would be the best question. What's the
That's a-
best
that is
Christian
the best
Brothers
question.
wine?
Christian Brothers brandy is still a great. All the brandies and cognacs and
I
Armagnac.
have Christian Brothers brandy on my bar cart
You have to have it all the time. All the
because
time.
I learned in my years of doing shore houses, nobody will take it.
Yeah.
You haven't had Brother Jerry at your house then.
If you brought down Captain or Crown or something like that, it's gone.
Right.
Bring Christian Brothers, it's yours.
Right. And it's a nice brand. It's a nice sipping.
Thank you, Michael. This was great.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Mike. That was
This
awesome.
was great.
Thank
And
you.
guys, if you have questions beyond this evening, feel free to send them to me. I can pass them along to Michael. Everybody really loved it. The conversation was awesome. I'm sure we could do something similar to this again, maybe a follow-up,
Sure.
around the holidays or something. I would love to do something eventually about food pairing for the holidays, what's the best thing to bring at Thanksgiving? Are we even having Thanksgiving? I mean, who knows? But maybe we're all drinking bottles by ourselves. I don't know.
Right.
But
And to be honest, I kept it like these wines are good, but they're not my favorite wines. And I'm more passionate about, European wines, even for the same price. And if you want to do this with other regions, I'm all
Yes.
about it.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
There's so much good wine in Europe, and it's so much cheaper than California wines because most of the time they're passed from generation to generation. So the house is already paid for. The vineyards are already paid for. So they don't have to, pay the mortgage on the land like these new wineries in California are. So they can charge literally $20 for a wine.
With the fires in California,
Right,
that may
the same thing,
change.
even worse.
Yeah, the
Really
price
even
may go
worse.
up.
Yeah, unfortunately, and it's
Should
really,
get some
you're really
good smoky
starting to see.
reds.
You're starting to see that California is a very dry and somewhat inhospitable place to grow grapes. They have to irrigate, number one. Like they can't grow grapes without irrigation. That's the first problem, and that tells you like it shouldn't even be there. And the best places are not irrigated. So there's certain parts of Napa that are not irrigated. So
Michael,
those are the places, nature is telling you, you can plant grapes here. When you have to irrigate, nature is telling you, you can't grow grapes there. So it's almost like built on a lie, built on not paying attention to what nature's telling you. So that's where you see this sort of stuff happening. And the difference is when you go to Europe, nature built that. Nature told them, this is where grapes belong. And it stayed there. And that's why it's always it's a bit more interesting.
Most of those California wineries were all either cattle grazing areas or vineyards. And
Absolutely, they were orchards too.
You know better than me. So
Right.
I'm reading so many of the California winemakers are buying property up in Oregon,
Yeah,
not just for climate change, but also for natural moisture where they don't have to irrigate. And a couple of them even buying property up in British Columbia
yeah, sure.
for Cabernet Franc.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mike, I'm just going to say, I can't believe that what a long way you've become. Mike and I were classmates, and he was
We're in student government.
student government with me. That used to come in sweats with the natty light and his Fiji bat. It was great. Hear all this and see and learn
We
so much.
sampled, we
from
sampled
you.
a very nice 1996 vintage of Natty Light, I think.
Oh,
That's right.
We all did.
that was a very good year, Joe. That's for sure.
You haven't been in government in Atlantic County for years. It's good to see LaSalle alumni who are in student government not doing time now.
I was in student government.
Guys. That's great. Made an effort.
She just hasn't been indicted.
I
yet.
haven't been indicted yet.
No, we're wine drinkers. Wine promotes. I mean, the Christian Brothers taught us the whole idea, but essentially all the winemakers that I met from LaSalle, and I had a roommate who now came back from Europe after 30 years, lives in Vermont. He just got in touch with me recently. He's also in his 70s, like I am, mid 70s. He's a little younger than me. I'll be 77, and I've done more wine books than he has, though. But the bottom line is that LaSalle, it's just a remarkable place. It's just open the whole world up, and it gives you an idea. It teaches you about wine. I think Michael hinted on that before. It's more than just a drink. It's, you know, it's culture, art, literature. It ties the whole thing together. Wine drinkers are just the most interesting people I have met in my whole life.
Mm-hmm. You're here.
Guys, I'm so glad you could all join us tonight. We obviously had a great time. I think anybody who missed out on it really missed out on something. But I'll talk to Mike about making this into a series.
Yeah.
And we will,
Happy.
so definitely email me. I put my email in the chat, but you have it already from earlier today. Send me your, any ideas or questions that you have, and we'll set it up for next time.
Awesome.
Sounds
Sounds
good.
good.
Thanks,
Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Mike,
This was
Joe.
Mike,
this
thank you
was
so much.
excellent, Mike. Thank you. It was great to see you again, as well as all the alumni.
Thanks, Brother Jerry. Always good to see you.
And I'm so glad nobody mentioned box wine.
Right. No,
That's what we have
Oh,
in
go ahead. Tell me about box wine. I mean, I like box wine too.
St. Albert's 110. There's plenty.
Yeah.
Take care. Have a great night, everybody. It's so good to see you all.
See you, Brother Jerry.
Bye,
See you,
all.
I
everybody.
was so glad to see that you were doing this for us. I appreciate it much.
My
Oh,
pleasure.
thanks, brother. We're glad you joined us. Mike, thanks so much.
Sure, Mary Kay.
All
Talk to
right,
you soon.
take care, guys.
See you guys. Bye-bye.
Take care. Have a good night.